Hey, boy. Okay, have a drink. This is sort of a discussion video. It's a discussion video born out of reading Orlando Furioso and of reading A Distant Mirror, which is a history book. One's a poem of chivalric romance, and the other book is a history of the calamitous 14th century, written in the 1970s by Barbara Tuchman. And it's an interesting clash between the two books, or an interesting reflection on each other, because a lot of the misery and well, first there's Orlando Furioso, where you have knights who are chivalrous and are going off for adventures and fighting in great wars and ennobling themselves and seem quite and are supposed to be kind of the heroes, the great heroes of the book, with a lot of undercurrents of mockery in it. And then A Distant Mirror is a history of actual knights, nobles who are knights, and the chivalry, and how they want to ride off for great glory in battles. But this is done in the context of horrible plague, just the Black Death descending upon Europe at the time, and that whenever they want to do war, whenever they want to show their glory and their splendor, they do it by pillaging their own people through taxes, or when they're at war, the best way to combat the other people is to destroy their land, or as you're retreating, destroy your own land, and thus completely impoverish your own people. And you kill the other guy's servants. You take the women. There's a lot of raping going on. It's like it is just awful. It makes you think that George R. R. Martin actually when he goes to kind of grim dark fantasy, he's actually toning things down. It is restrained in how brutal and terrible it is. I think it's kind of it's it's just one of these things where I think, having read Barbara Tuchman, and it's not just Orlando Furioso, it's a lot of just sort of generic fantasy where you have knights and you have kind of the romance of this kind of adventure story. You don't think about what it's celebrating and what it's underlying it, which is this kind of sense of, we're following these protagonists, these knights, these heroes. They're the special people. And you don't think about it. It's like, yeah, you're doing that as a kind of this was an echo of an ideology that was used of we are the special people. We are God's chosen. We get to rule peasants who are filthy, smelly, stupid, subhuman, basically. And that this what we have today of modern fantasy is somewhat of an echo of that. And I mean, there is the one thing of, you can see, like, wow, I can see why the concept of grim dark fantasy is so necessary as a corrective to this, because when you start looking at the actual history of these times, if you because there's the tricky thing that I think a lot of fantasy does, and a lot of the chivalric romance does, which it makes an imagined past where men were men, and the great knights and noble and all this stuff. It's like, and it is an ideology to justify oppression in a lot of ways. And it actually makes me think about how nowadays we have a lot of entertainment, a lot of modern entertainment set in the modern time, which is fetishizing rich people and their wonderful, glamorous lives. And yes, we'll like a lot of the chivalric romances, will make fun of them, will have criticisms, but we also get to kind of, we get to kind of imagine all that kind of splendor and wealth and think, wouldn't it be cool if we were those people? Because we wouldn't be assholes like they are. When actually, structurally, you see, no, just people being people. And when people have absolute power, people act horribly, horribly. But it is one of those things where you think of kind of the fantasy realms, where you have, someone like Tolkien, where you have great knights and kings. It's aspirational, but it's also kind of ideological in the way of these are our betters. We should have these people held above us to rule us. And you can see that with, like, kind of worship of billionaires and stuff like that, great wealthy businessmen today. It's like, oh, they're smarter, they're somehow better than us, and there's a reason why they should have all this power over us. Even stuff like, it's like, where did the main amount of taxes come in the 14th century? It didn't come from the nobles and stuff like that. They were oftentimes, them and the church were oftentimes exempt from stuff. Or but the main crushing thing is like, well, if we're going to get taxes, we get it from the little guys who can't fight back. And you think about that now, of big corporations, of billionaires, they figured out the system, how to game the system, and so that the only ones left to pay for armies, for stuff like that, are us, the little people. And oftentimes, a lot of our wealth gets funneled off to support things that are not in our interest, like healthcare, like infrastructure. All that stuff is not going where it should go, or we should be. The wealth distribution is such that it's getting more and more concentrated in the higher ups versus getting dispersed out throughout the society, and all of us living better. I might sound a little socialist right now, but there's a lot of this stuff where, reading Tuckman's book, it's like, oh, you can see little sparks here of, like, all the peasant revolts, and the demands that are made sound remarkably like what's going to happen with something like the French Revolution, or just kind of general kind of democracy, and the concepts of that going forward. But at this time, the heroes, the knights, a part of what they're doing, with the chivalric code, which means they have to behave honorable to each other. They don't have to behave honorable to any peasants who, like, stand up for the rights and demand things. They'll agree to stuff, and then they'll swoop in later and crush these peasant rebellions brutally, without remorse, because they know if they actually didn't stomp this stuff down, they would be doomed. They would be dead. It's an existential thing, but it's also kind of fed by an ideology of, we are the superiors. This is the filth, and we can do whatever we want with the filth, and the filth should know their place. And yeah, it's it puts a lot of the night stuff in a different context for me, which is like, it's some ways it's in that context, but suddenly you go like, oh, I'm someone who lives in a democratic society. I'm someone who believes in kind of equitable treatment, and like, wealth distribution, like, that we shouldn't have everything concentrated in a tiny percent of the population. It should actually kind of go throughout. And I mean, you can put that further forward into, the amount of wealth that is concentrated in really wealthy countries versus all the other countries who have much less wealth and are structurally held down by the ones who are on top, because they know if they let go of that, then they're screwed. Yeah, it's just one of those things where, oh, reading history can expose some of the kind of some of the not so great underlying uses of something like fantasy. Like, what are the uses of fantasy, I guess, is what I'm talking about. And is one of them kind of a conservative bent of, some ye olde time when things were better? It's like, that's kind of disturbing. Which isn't to say that a lot of modern fantasy doesn't actually try and question and pull that stuff apart. And even something like grim dark, which often gets kind of lumped in as sort of a bro dude kind of conservative thing in its way. There is still something in there of, we're going to, no, let's talk about what lords and nobles and knights were actually like, and how they treated people. Now, oftentimes just by the nature of these fantasy works, they're still the main characters. They're still kind of one side is there's good ones and there's bad ones, versus saying, oh, this whole system is pretty fucked. You don't have a lot of the death of nobility and the French Revolution happening in books. Maybe in Terry Pratchett might be the best case scenario of that. I think of Ankh-Morpork and various cities, and there's some transitions to more democratic leading societies in there, because he's able to kind of speed up history in a way and work through things. But yeah, it was just interesting when your history book impinges on your fantasy books. All right, I will leave it there. More videos later.